I'm going to get him. Not nap time, buddy. You're napping a half an hour. Come. You got it. I don't want you to miss it. You're in the middle of things. You're going to lose this train of thought. Come on. Yalla. You're napping half an hour. See you down there. All right, let's begin. We're still... All right, I'll just do a little review while you're hooking that up from yesterday's class. So we're talking about a pasuk in this week's parsha. You have a copy? You pass the copies around. It says, Ki ha'adam eitz hasadeh. Is the man a tree of the field? And we discussed, there's two different explanations of this verse. One is from the Sifrei, and one is from the Gemara. The Sifrei discusses that what do we learn from the fact that it says a man is a tree of the field is that man gets his sustenance from the tree. We discussed, is that really true that he only gets his sustenance from the trees? So we explained, really, it means that he gets his sustenance primarily from the vegetation realm. Just what? The tree is like sort of the pinnacle of vegetation, so shorthand says a man is a tree of the field, means he gets his sustenance from the tree. We discussed on a spiritual level, what does it mean to get your sustenance from the vegetation? And we said that in general, we get all of our sustenance from the lower species, in other words, inanimate plant and animal. Why? Because actually, those lower species really come from a higher source than man. In their source, in the higher worlds, they actually precede man in their spiritual heights. Just what? When they fell into this world, they fell into a lower state. Therefore, the energy that's in them is hidden and trapped. By us eating them, we elevate them in order to release this energy, and then we get sustained from actually the higher energy that's in them. Right? That was the whole process. And therefore we said it's true that we also get energy from animals, but since vegetation fell even lower than animals, therefore the vegetation has more strength and godly energy than the animals. Therefore we get primarily our energy from the vegetation, and in the vegetation itself, the trees are the king of the vegetation, and thus we've explained the Sifrei's understanding of man is like a tree. We get our sustenance from there. However, then we went on in the Gemara. The Gemara has a completely different outlook on this verse. And it says, what does it mean the man is like a tree of the field? And it gives sort of an analogy that first of all, it quotes the rest of that pasuk, where it describes which trees we can cut down and which trees we can't. So it says, right, Mimenu sochel, from certain ones you can eat, but also lo sichros, and those you're not allowed to cut down. So fruit trees you can eat, therefore you can't cut them down. And other trees, it says tashchis v'karasa, that you do cut them down and tear them up. So how do we explain this when it comes to man is like a tree? If he's a Talmud Chacham, which means you want to eat from him, you can eat from him, his fruits are good. So him you can't cut down, right? But if not, then you cut him down. What does it mean? You turn away from him. This is how the Gemara learns this verse. So basically what the Gemara comes out to be explaining is seemingly a completely different explanation of what it means. Ki ha'adam eitz hasadeh. It's not just saying that man is like a tree because we get our sustenance from a tree, but rather it's saying that man is literally compared to a tree, right? And then when it asks, how is man like a tree? How is man compared to a tree? Then it gives this example, a particular example, that a tree, if it has fruits, it's like then eat from it like a man. If he has fruits, if it's Talmud Chacham, eat from him, and if not, not. So it's basically, the difference here is that the first one says we're not compared to a tree, but we are a tree in that we get sustained from a tree. The Gemara's explanation, that's the Sifrei, the Gemara's explanation says that we're literally likened to a tree, and then when it says how, it explains how, because like a Talmud Chacham, you can eat from him. So far, so good. That was yesterday's class. Please, everyone, take from inside page 95, second paragraph on the second column. See that? Tzarich lahavin. Now the questions. We have to understand. We're going to have actually three questions. Try and keep them straight. Ma haisa lechatchila temiyas haGemara. What, to begin with, was this wonder of the Gemara? When it says, V'chi Adam eitz hasadehu, it's asking, is a man really a tree of the field? In other words, what's such a big question about that? Mitzuim prati dimyon rabim. In fact, this is not such a chiddush. We find many, many details. Mishtavim ha'adam la'etz, which compare man to a tree, right? In the Mishnah, for example, of Pirkei Avos, we have a few different examples. Mavura kesher bein ha'adam la'etz, right? What does it say? Who remembers Pirkei Avos comparing man to a tree? It says someone, there's a few of them, but one of them, for example, it says a person whose wisdom outweighs his deeds, right, is like a tree that his leaves and branches are great, but his roots are weak and few, right? So in other words, if you might have a lot of wisdom, but if you don't have deeds rooting you down, it's going to flow, it's going to break down, right? Whereas a man who has a lot of deeds and more than his wisdom, his strong roots, and no winds can blow him over. In other words, there's many likenesses of man to a tree. And there's even more in Pirkei Avos themselves, right? A tree that's planted by the water, it says, is like basically will never get shaken up and so forth. So when the Gemara is there asking, is man really like a tree? Why is that such a question for the Gemara that it would be? Remember, the Gemara comes after the Mishnah. It's heard many examples of man being like a tree, right? Why is the Gemara shocked and wondering, is man really like a tree? Show me how. How does that work? Mekushi is though. So from this question, also from the language of the Gemara, where it says, is man really a tree? That the Gemara must mean that the meaning of this verse, it must be that we're not just merely comparing man to a tree, because when it comes to comparisons of man to a tree, we're not lacking them. When the Gemara is asking this like question, and it's bothered, it's saying, is man really a tree? That's what it's saying. It's saying there's much more than just a mere comparison to man to a tree, right? It's not just a dimyon ba'alma bein adam ve'etz hasadeh, turning the page, but the entirety of man's existence is a tree of the field. So that if that's what the Gemara is really asking, not looking just for mere comparisons, the verse says man is a tree, and the Gemara says really a tree. So then, if that's the case, we have to understand. So how does the Gemara wind up answering this question and like feeling satisfied with his answer? In this shemotzim od prachem shavim bo. And at the end of the day, what was the answer of the Gemara?
About if a man is a tree?
Yeah. If he's a Talmud Chacham, eat from him. If not, cut him down, right? So in other words, the question is, how is that such a sterling answer to explain why man is not just merely compared to a tree, but man is a tree, right? The Gemara is so bothered by the fact that you're not just comparing man to a tree, but he is a tree. And when the Gemara sort of satisfies itself that that is in fact true, it seemingly just gives another detail where man is compared to a tree. Why is that the end-all, be-all of the satisfying of the Gemara that man is in fact a tree? It's just sof. There's a dimyon b'prat echad nosef v'lo kol hapratim. It's just another detail of a comparison, right? If he has fruits or he doesn't have fruits, he's a Talmud Chacham, right? How is that so much different than if wisdom, is greater than his deeds, or his deeds is greater than the wisdom? It's just another seemingly comparison in a particular detail, not the entirety of man's unification with this tree. But why is this particular comparison yoser mikol hashar? Why is that more significant than all other comparisons you could make? And as a kesher ikari bein adam lebein ha'etz hasadeh, which would then show us the true nature of the unification of man as a tree. Yeah.
So the Gemara is asking, is man like a tree? Like, and the explanation is like in every way a man really like a tree? And then the Gemara answers that question by saying, if he's a Talmud Chacham, he's like a tree because you can eat his fruits.
Right.
And the question on that is, how does that answer anything about if man is like a tree or not?
That's pretty good. Let me try what you just did one more time, right? Don't start with the Gemara. Start with the Chumash. Ki ha'adam eitz hasadeh. It says man is a tree. The Gemara comes and says, man is a tree? What, are you crazy? Right? How is man a tree? Now, the first question we had on it is, why is the Gemara so flustered about that? We find many comparisons. So it must be that the Gemara is flustered because it's not looking for comparisons. It's looking for the answer, how you're going to mamish call a man a tree, right? And then what does the Gemara do? It gives an answer. If he has fruits, eat from him. If he doesn't have fruits, cut him down. So it gives, seemingly, it just gives another comparison. So why is this comparison, this particular example that's given here, satisfy the Gemara's perplexity that man is truly a tree? Seemingly, it's just another comparison of man to a tree. Why, I don't see the significance of that answer over another particular comparison that we could find. And yet, seeming that is it, because the Gemara is settled with that and moves on. Everyone follow?
So why is it okay again with the comparison?
We don't know. That's our question. We don't know why that's such a sterling comparison. That's question number one. Question number two, Yiser mizo, what's furthermore, Dimyon zeh shel Adam le'ilan, this particular comparison of man to a tree, hu rak benogei leTalmid Chacham. It's only for a Talmid Chacham. You know, this is a very minuscule comparison which refers to a specific type of Jew who happens to be a Talmid Chacham. Okay, but then the only comparison to a tree is whether you're learned or not learned, right? In other words, there's no other comparisons of man to a tree. You could probably come up with 100 right now if we sat here and started talking about it, right? So this is like zeroing in on whether a man is a Talmid Chacham or not, right? How does this connect with the general species of mankind, right? And connect him to a tree? What is so special about this example? And thirdly and finally, which is going to be actually the big kicker in the end of this sicha, ha'im yesh kasher bein perush hasifrei lebein perush haGemara. Is there a connection between these two explanations that we just found? One from the Midrash, one from the Gemara. What was the perush from the Midrash again? Adam Eitz Hasadeh. What did the Sifrei say about it?
Is that the Perkei Avot explanation?
No, the Sifrei is the Midrash. Yeah. You guys, your brains are fried from too much Torah learning. It's good. I'm not. That's okay.
Oh, because the person is sustained by it.
Yes, the first parish we said man is like a tree because he gets his sustenance from a tree, right? And that whole thing we said over there that he gets his sustenance from the lower realms. And now the Gemara says, forget he's getting his sustenance from a tree. He is a tree in this particular example. Fine. Those are the three questions we're basing ourselves on. Chapter 3. Adam Nikra Olam Katan. You may have heard this before. It's a very cool idea. Man is called a small world, which means that the world is called a big man as well. Right? We basically, man and the world, the whole, and when we say the world, I mean like the whole Seder Ishtalshlus is basically called Adam. Right? Which means just like man has sort of 613 parts and 10 spheros, which are the source of these parts, so too the entirety of reality has 613 passageways and 10 spheros, which define his existence. So we're literally like a microcosm of the whole world, and the whole world is a macrocosm of man.
Also, like all the blood vessels in the body is like if you measure it's the length of the circumference of the earth.
Is it really?
Yeah, 3 times. Oh, it's 3 times?
Adam nikra olam katan. Well, the Midrash Tanchuma just sums this up in a line that man is called a small world. Which means everything you find in the big world, you're going to find them also in man. Right? You have forests and deserts and water and trees and lakes, fish, and animals, everything you're going to find out there in the big world, it has some kind of a correspondence inside of man. Just like the world in general, you can divide it into 4 different levels, which are what? Domim, tzomeh, chai, medaber. What does that mean? Inanimate, growing animal and man. Kach gam ba'adam, inside of man, mitzuya chaluka zu shel arba sugim. We have our own levels of inanimate, growing animal and man. What's the inanimate level of the man?
Bones.
Yeah, the bones. There's different ways of sort of breaking this down. Certainly the bones, but in terms of more like of a spiritual connotation. In other words, our physicality itself has these different levels, but also like sort of in our kochos hanefesh, the powers of the soul. Usually we talk about the inanimate being the letters that we possess. right? Because the letters are called stones. We've discussed elsewhere. Remember this idea that the letters are like stones? Do you remember this idea?
I thought they were like carving into the stone, like removing material.
We spoke also about that, but there's this notion that Avram Avinu, where he says, Shtei avanim bonos shtei batim, shalosh avanim bonos shisha batim. 2 stones build 2 houses, 3 stones build 6 houses. What does that mean?
There's permutations of letters.
Right, a stone is therefore compared to a letter. If you have 2 stones, you can make 2 houses. What is a house in this analogy? A word. So you could aleph base, you have av and ba. If you have 3 letters, which are 3 stones, you could build 6 houses. It means you can build 6 different words based on 3 different letters, right? And so it goes on and on and on. So we see Bechlal throughout the whole study of Kabbalah Chassidus that stones and letters are synonymous. So inside, and why is that basically? Because no matter what you put into these letters, let's say for example, I could have the same letters, 22 letter combinations, I could put in them just the basic bare bones letters, or I could like sort of fill them with emotion, I could fill them with intelligence. The same letters can house, right, totally different levels of the person's emotions and intellect, etc. But the letters stay exactly the same, right? Even if I have the Torah or Lakutei Torah, or I have Dr. Seuss on one hand, one holds the secrets of the universe and one holds Dr. Seuss. But the reality is that it's the same 22 letters. Like the stones don't change. So inside of ourselves, this is sort of like the inanimate aspect of ourselves, just the bare bones. Inside of man, letters are called stones. And what is then called the growing aspect of man?
Thoughts.
So let's look inside, right? This is where he doesn't exactly spell them all out, but he does spell out this one. Midos. The midos sheba adam hem bechinas tzomech sheba adam. Our emotions is our growing. Why would emotions be called the growth, the vegetation inside of a man?
Because they all stem from fear or love.
Why is that growing?
Well, because they come from them, and they can come in many permutations. They can extend in various ways.
Okay. Anybody else have thrown into the suggestion box here? Why is emotions called growing?
So as you grow up, your emotions naturally just...
Yeah, the emotions grow. Unlike the letters, which stay the same if you're 5 or 100, your emotions grow with you, right? Memidos yeshno tzmicha, mikatnus degadlus, right? In other words, a child loves sugar and candy and nuts, whatever, like it says in the Shulchan Aruch. You give a child nuts if you want to drive him to learn Torah. I think that was a little bit in the old days. But when you develop, you have deeper loves. You love, good melody. You love wisdom. You could love God, etc. So your love expands as you grow. Therefore, it's called the midos are called the growing aspect of man. Okay, fine. So inside of man, we just let's hold there for a second. We see that there's such a thing called the vegetation kingdom, which is our midos. But what does man have over all the animals is our intellect, right? Now, let's just unpack this line for a second. Even though, so in other words, man, our primary greatness is our intellect, we hope. But he says, even though the domim tzomech and chai in man, so in other words, the lower levels that are inside of the human being, they are all higher than those same levels in the big world out there, right? So what is the big world out there? It's actually rocks and vegetation and animals, right? So we also have rocks and vegetation and animals inside of us, and the domim tzomech and chai inside of man are obviously more sophisticated and sort of higher spiritually than the actual rocks and animals in the world, right? But that's not what makes man great. Again, let me try and explain since everybody's sleeping. Hello, right? What are we saying here? That even though the inanimate growing an animal that's inside of man, which are sort of spiritual qualities inside of us, though they're already superior to those same qualities in the world. So you could say man's greatness is that inanimate growing an animal in us is superior than the inanimate growing an animal in the actual world, right? Because let's say your emotions are something much more sophisticated than plants, right? But that's not what stands out as the greatness of man, is that the other qualities inside of us are higher than they are outside in the world. The greatness of man is what? Yisronuhu b'kachshu bal seichel. It's that we have thoughts, right? We can think, have intelligence. So the fact is, all the other parts of us are also higher than the rest of the world. But that's not what makes us great. What makes us great is we have this whole other thing that's not found in any other places in the world. It's only found in man, right? There is no real intelligence in the same way in what's called medaber, what the Torah calls human intelligence. You don't find such a thing outside of the human kingdom. Zoe Efo Shelas Gemara. So therefore, the Gemara's question is really like this: Ki Adam eitz sadehu. The Gemara is really asking: is man a tree of the field? In other words, Nachon Amnam Sheba Adam Yesh Gam Inyan Shel Eitz said. No one's arguing that man has a tree of the field inside of him. What's the tree of the field inside of man?
Emotion.
His emotions. But when the Torah comes and says man is a tree of the field, the Gemara is a Kabbalist, right? The Gemara is looking into the depths of this thing. And the Gemara realizes that even though man has the level of vegetation inside of him, is that what makes man great? He's a tree? That's what he is? Right? Tzomeach, midos? No, that's not what makes him great. Nachon amnam sheba adam yesh gam inyan shel eitz hasada. He has such a thing. Aval klum bekach mizbati yisrona shel adam. But is that really what his greatness should be expressed as? So that's what's bothering the Gemara. The Gemara is bothered by the fact that we are defining man as his midos, when really the man's should be defined by his unique contribution to existence, which is his intellect. You get the question? It's a pretty cool question when you look at it like that.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
The Gemara is not just wondering if man is a tree, you know.
What do the thoughts of man correspond to that animal?
So you want to go up another round? We kind of left that part unfinished. So if we want to say the letters are the stones and the emotions are the vegetation, so okay, let's spell it out. What would be the animal in the man, then inside of man?
The thoughts.
I'd say self-instinct.
You say what?
Like instinct, like
Instinct,
animal
thoughts. Anybody else?
instinct.
What's the animal in man? Well, the emotions are already higher than speech, right? So what's higher than emotions inside of man? Consciousness, desire. What's that?
Chabad.
Right, but in Chabad itself, Chabad is a couple things, right? What's Chabad primarily based on? We spoke about this morning. Let's take Das out of the equation for a second. What are we left with? Chab, Chochma and Bina, right? Because in general, right, there are 4 parts. We said there's 4 dimensions. Those represent the Yud, K, Vav, K, which is general are what? Chochma, Bina, the Midos, and Malchus. So in mind, in the Chabad, there's actually 2 segments, right? So if you want to say that the lower Hey would be the letters, the Vav would be the Midos, the higher Hey would be what? Bina. And the Yud would be Chochma. So inside of man, our Bina is like our animal reality. Now it is a type of intelligence, but it's extraordinarily different than the intelligence which is called Adam Sheba Adam, man inside of man, which is our Chochma. So in other words, truth be told, animals also do have a certain level of intelligence, right? But what they don't have is Chochma, right? They have Bina, which means they can sort of think. And obviously their thoughts can even lead to emotions. There's a certain level of intelligence inside of the animal world. We have that also, right? But it's not an imaginatory inspiration that you're able to basically discover and invent, right? That's what animals don't have. They basically pretty much doing the same thing they did since the beginning. They haven't invented roads and cars and spaceships. Like they're just completely content with thinking about whatever's put before them. They don't imagine. So the level of thought, which is connected with Bina, which is essentially conducting your emotions, right? The thoughts that are governing your emotions, that's the level of animal in man. And the level of Chochma is the level of man of man.
So do angels also not have Chochma?
Angels, basically, yeah, they're like animals in that sense, that they're like sort of from Bria and below, right? The world of Bria is, the 4 worlds also go according to this, right? So Atzilus is the Yud, Bria is the Hey, So there's, first of all, there's angels of Bria. There's angels of Yetzirah. Those are called like the vegetation angels, right? There's angels of Asiya, which are called the Ophanim. They're like the wheels that touch the ground. And the angels of Bria, compared to what's going on in Atzilus, are mamish like animals compared to man, right? So they, even though they have this wild understanding of God, but the reality is, compared to sort of the man that's on the chariot, they're merely beasts. That's what we call the angels, like the Aryeh and the Shur and the Nesher. We call them Chayos HaKodesh. We call them holy animals, right? Because at the end of the day, they're in like a bina state of perception of God, which is considered animal compared to an atzilus state of understanding of God, which is like man.
Is there malachim in Atzilus?
Not really. There's neshamas in atzilus, right? And that's the whole thing, that like man compared to animal is like the neshamas compared to the angels. They have a completely different perception and unification with Hashem.
So how come there's cases of angels like, asking Hashem or questioning or like seemingly having their own reasonings?
I mean, they're very, very rare cases of
Like
that.
when the 10 martyrs were killed and the angels were like, stop. Hashem's like, oh, if you don't stop talking, I'm going to, destroy everything. Seemingly the angels had some sort of, personal want in that case.
I don't know if it's a personal want per se, but like a perception of God. In other words, they saw something that didn't make any sense, right? Zo Torah v'yischara. This is the Torah and this is its reward. In other words, Hashem was revealing something which was beyond their comprehension. It says, "Ay makom kavod la'aritzo," right? They're saying, where is the glory of Hashem that we can praise Him? They perceive that there's something beyond them, and that's basically what you just mentioned. I think is like an example of that. They were perceiving that God was doing something totally beyond comprehension, and that's what aroused them. They're there to understand God. And here you're killing the greatest sages of the world. You're doing something that is beyond godly perception. So that aroused them, to basically have curiosity.
So they're like glitching out.
Yeah. I mean, in general, they're saying kadosh, kadosh, kadosh. Their whole arousal is to be aroused sometimes by the godliness that they perceive, sometimes by the godliness which is beyond their perception, depending on what kind of angel it is. So, for example, there's angels in the world of Bria that are called srafim. Right? And it says, why are they called srafim? They're burning up. Why are they burning up? Because they're having a realization of something which is beyond them, and it just like negates their existence. So that's kind of like, is this the Torah? Is its reward? They're just like burning up over something happening from God they don't understand. I'm not saying, I don't think you can call that like a shak levatoria and a back and forth conversation they're having with Hashem. Although I'm not going to get mixing with the angels' business too much. But in principle, this is... Say it again?
What is the Gemara? Why is it comfortable with this answer now?
The Gemara is even less comfortable with the answer. The Gemara is, now we understand what the Gemara is so flustered about, and which is what? Which is man is a tree, man is emotions. Right. Now, what's even going to be weirder is, how is the Gemara then going to get satisfied with the answer that it gives? Right? We already didn't understand the answer that it gives. It sounded like one more detail of an infinite many types of comparisons. So we're saying, no, that's the answer. But now that we know the secret question, how is man's greatness merely his emotions? Now we even have a further disturbance of how that answer was the ultimate answer. Kushiyas HaGemara, we're over time. We'll pick it up next time.